resources in Alberta.
Let me bring in the rest of the press gallery. Tonda McCharles, a reporter with the Toronto Star's Parliamentary Bureau, and Carl Dockstader, the host of One Dish, One Mic and Executive Director of the Niagara Regional Native Centre. Join in, please. Tonda, your reaction to the not only the Court of Appeal in Alberta, their decision, but the federal government's not surprising decision to challenge it at the Supreme Court.
Well, you said it. It's not surprising. Of course, this federal government will seek to defend its own legislation at the highest court, given that they've already won in the court on the carbon pricing bill that was also upheld by a couple of provincial appeal courts prior to this. But look, the Alberta Court of Appeal decision it was written for headlines, wasn't it? The language in it is extraordinary. And, you know, they make a strong argument with which the Conservatives and the Alberta government agree, but this is not the final say. And much as the Conservative critic, Mr. McLean, might wish to criticize the Supreme Court on its other ruling, the fact is we've all decided we're not going to fight these things out in the streets. We're going to give it over to an independent body, and we have a court system that will give a final decision at the Supreme Court. So this is far from over, I would say, but it's a very powerfully worded ruling, and it's an interesting legal and logical reasoning insofar as it deals with the whole question of what do we do when we have an issue that supersedes boundaries, provincial boundaries. And it harkens back to what it's kind of like, you know, it's Canada's originalism, right? Like in the States, they talk about what the founding fathers always wanted. And here we always go back to, well, oh, is it provincial or national, federal jurisdiction? I mean, it's a confounding question when it comes to issues like the environment. And frankly, like we saw in issues of health during the pandemic, you know, so I'm going to be watching very closely what the Supreme Court does with it, but we won't probably see that decision for another year or more.
Yeah, Carl, your reaction, and again, they have, as Tonda says, the so-called living tree document, there's an evolutionary interpretation of the Constitution here in Canada. Some don't like that, some do. We'll see how the Supreme Court weighs in on that. Carl, what do you make of the decision and the political impacts of this decision?
Oh, I mean, I think it's more of fighting over Section 91 and 92 of the Constitution Act and who has jurisdiction. What I have to point out is that the federal Conservatives took a crack at assessment reform in 2012, and Indigenous peoples took to the streets exactly 10 years ago in the Idle No More movement. What I also want to point out is when we're jockeying back and forth over Section 91 and 92, the provinces and the federal government have done a poor job reconciling Indigenous rights on this. I'll be very surprised if this ruling stands the test of the Supreme Court that already ruled on the carbon tax that it is a threat of the highest order to the country and indeed the world. And that also Indigenous rights being included in this act are crucial to how this is going to move forward.
I think that's such a really good point, Evan. I mean, also, this is a court and a government that takes, at least in word, takes the rights of Indigenous peoples to have a say in all these projects very seriously. So that's going to be an important, not just political element, but a really important legal element. And a lot of that law is still being charted.
Well, I agree.
Greg, just last word to...
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead,
the
Greg.
proponents in this case were also other provinces, as well as several Indigenous organizations. So Indigenous organizations are challenging this law in the court as well. So we'll see them weigh in on when it goes before the Supreme Court of Canada as well. But I do want to address the whole nature of this language that was delivered by the Alberta Court of Appeal, because it's similar, if you will, to the same language that was delivered by the Supreme Court of Canada when it talked about not the division of powers, but the existential threat, and therefore we have to supersede what was the way we govern ourselves in this country, as if other levels of government don't have the ability to respect the environment. And that's where the gross overstep of that is, because public officials at all levels are dealing with the environment in many ways. And just because certain parts of our economy are prospering and we have to continue to decarbonize is no reason to throw out the rowboat.
Okay, I got to leave it there. Greg McLean, first of all, I really appreciate you joining us. I think there's going to be a very interesting legal debate over the next year, but the political fallout, given the language in here, is also going to be quite explosive. So, Mr. McLean, always a pleasure to have you. I know Tonda and Carl are sticking around.